Good morning, it's Craig here. It's Tuesday, the 22nd of January. Uh, this morning was a really good morning. I woke up at a really good time. I have had a couple of weeks over the summer where I've been up late, sleeping in, and I've been correcting that over the past week. And this was the best morning yet, in which I woke up at a really good time, uh, early, and then I was able to come straight down to the studio here while it was still the morning light was just starting to come up, and with that sort of time in front of me before I need to, start the day in other ways, it's such a good feeling to have those couple of hours where it's just me, quiet here, um, which is exactly the sort of thing that's needed, to do the right sort of writing for this project. Um, I started by looking at what I had written yesterday, just before I did the video for yesterday, and I was happy with parts of what I'd written. Some of the pacing was good, the sentence structure was good, but the tone was not quite what I was going for upon morning reflection. It was a bit too somber, a bit too melancholy and serious, um, which does reflect some of the books I've been reading lately. But it's not what I wanted to project, because much of the reason for doing this new version of Beach Surgery is to try to capture more of my voice and what I like about language, which I've got to stop saying voice, more of what I really enjoy um, in words, in terms of the variance of colour, the variety of topics, some of the surrealism and the humour and things that I really love that words can do. I felt like the first version of Beach Surgery was only capturing maybe like a quarter of that. Um, what I looked at that I had written yesterday afternoon captured another part of that quadrant, not the beach surgery part, another part, but was just a little too dark, um, just a little too serious, which is not the tone I'm going for. But what I wrote this morning is exactly what I'm going for. I was really happy with it. It's such a good feeling to see it on the page, to think it actually came out, quite easily at that time of morning. Um, and I'd be really happy if those were the first two paragraphs that lead the book that I've written, or the first two components of this monologue. If they are what starts the book in its final form, it's exactly what I want. So it is really starting as I mean to go on. Um, Sometimes it's the hardest part, just to crack the ice and make those initial moves forward at the very start. And I've got that now, and I'm reading back over the paragraphs, and I'm just so happy with the tone, the sentence structure, the paragraph structure, the length of what I'm writing, the way that it adheres to the structure that I've been working on for the past couple of days is perfect. And I needed to see it. I needed to, like I think I had said previously, one of the things that I had been doing was estimating and saying this section should be around, say, 300 words, and that I'd write it. And in one instance, it came to 4,000 words, and I thought, there's lots of good ideas in there, but it's just not. It's not the final copy. Like, it's not what needs to stay. And then I have tried again. This is what I think the size should be. It ends up being this. It's not something I can just edit down into this because of the way it's all been said. It really just has to be shelved. Think about the ideas for using later, but just rewrite it again. And really, that's what I've been doing. I think this is the fifth or sixth version of this particular introduction to the story that I've tried to write, and it's been the first one that adhered somewhat to the length of the components that I wanted to include in the monologue, and because it adhered to the size of those building blocks, um, it works so much better, and I was able to say better things and more concisely and more understandable, and that's what I'm going for. So it was worth the many times over, sort of rewriting that to get the tone right. I've also got not a new way, I guess, but it's a way of writing these components into Scrivener, which is the program that I use to type in. It's very similar to other ways that I've been writing, but I don't know, it's just allowing me to do a bit more focus on the individual paragraphs in the way that I really like to write. I remember reading years ago, I think probably when I was still at university, there was a Don Delillo book of interviews with him about writing in his books, and he said something that I've always tried to do, and now I think I'm really doing it in the best way that I can, which is, just focus on each paragraph as its own individual thing, rather than having a slab of text on the page that you just write down, which I have been doing more of recently because I felt a flow to keep going, and it's very tempting to accept that, but then upon reading it back later, it just doesn't, to me, doesn't sound or look the way that I would like it to. But when you do a paragraph by paragraph, very explicit, this is the visual space of this individual paragraph, that's finished, shelve that until later, now work on the next paragraph. And then you join them up and see a particular flow that comes from them, which as I'm writing is the voice of a monologue being told. So it's even more about the flow and the rhythm, and me saying it out loud constantly. As I'm writing, I'm saying it out loud to make sure that it sounds right, which is something I haven't done before because I've never framed these as monologues quite in the way that I'm doing now. I've always looked for a particular internal aesthetic that when you read it in your head, it sounds right and looks right and has a particular logic that resonates, I think, inside the head. But what I'm trying to do now is to make sure that it's meant to be heard. And when it's meant to be heard, all of those things ring true, even more so about the way that it's internally processed, I think. So it really does hit both marks. One of the things that plays into that is I'm completely doing away with the use of commas, which is something that I remember doing about 20 years ago when the first thing I really ever tried to write after being exposed to Beckett, which is still the way that I am probably trying to imitate all these years on, was just this I loved that he could write sentences without commas, because commas always felt like you're adding too much information into this sentence. If you can't say it in a particular way without a comma, you're just adding carriages onto this train that become very long and very hard to process sometimes, even though I know the function of a comma is to help contain a particular structure and legibility to the sentence. But man, when you take away that sentence and just focus on a spoken sentence, and I don't mean short, staccato, 6-word, 9-word sentences that are very, maybe a bit too much like Beckett sometimes, focused on repetition and a particular succinctness that, that's not what I'm going for. Some of the some of the sentences are very long, even though they don't have a comma, but they work to my mind, in my ear, in my tongue as I'm saying them. And as long as you don't do that every single sentence, I think you can have very long sentences with no comma, but work really well. And you can have short sentences and middle-sized sentences, and as long as you have the right aesthetic balance to all of that, um, I think the sentences sound really good. They're clear, they're understandable, and they stop me from trying to overpopulate too many ideas and cadences in a single sentences in a single sentence with commas that to me ends up looking very messy, and I don't like that sort of mess on the page. So that's where I'm going. That's how it's all panning out. Like I said, very happy with what's been written this morning. I will read it back across the day and a bit later, and hopefully it'll still sound and read right. And then if I'm still happy with it in time, and I'm going to keep writing in that mode at the moment and working through those components. So yeah, that's the next step. I'll see you tomorrow morning, where I will have completed more of those components, hopefully, and I'll be able to share if I'm still as happy with what I wrote this morning or whether I've tinkered with it slightly. I hope you have a good day, and I'll see you tomorrow.